Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 7th chapter in the book of Deuteronomy. Herein we learn of the privilege of being sanctified through the practice of separation. And before we cover that, there's 26 verses. We're going to do the bare minimum of the chapter which comes before us, which is a call to complete and total devotion, love, loyalty, and obedience to Yahweh. And it is the foundation for it can be found in the 4th verse, which is known as the Shema. It is in a statement of the singularity and uniqueness of Yahweh. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our Elohim, Yahweh is one. This was supposed to be the earliest phrase that a Jewish child was to learn, to be instructed and taught, and they carried things called philanthropies, which inscribed these very words on their head, so they had a continual reminder of this central phrase in confession. And then the 5th verse reads, "And you shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." So connected to it, the statement and fact and existence of his singular uniqueness is the reciprocal obligation to love him with all your faculties and all their capacities and hold nothing back. It is to love, serve, and adore him with abandon. And this is because he is unique. Verse 13, "Fear Yahweh your Elohim and serve him and swear by his name." So he should be the exclusive object of our worship. We are to fear him. We are to love him, but we are also to fear him. We can fear him not because of what he has in store for us, but what he can do to us. Just the fact that he has the potential to assign us to hell and damnation and destruction is sufficient for even the most righteous and innocent saint. None of us are strictly innocent to fear for him. So there is a righteous fear. And serve him, we should, our identities, our life should not be our own. We should be engaged in service to him and swear by his name. Now, with his name, the name is the power. So when we swear by his power, that means we are taking seriously the solemn thing that we swear upon. Verse 17, "Diligently keep the commandments of Yahweh your Elohim and his witnesses and its laws which he has commanded you. And you shall do what is right and good in the eyes of Yahweh, that it might be well with you, and that you shall go in and possess the good land of which Yahweh swore to your fathers, to drive out all the enemies from before you, as Yahweh has spoken." So the element, the adjective of diligently means to just have that complete the devotion, the consistency of discipline and attention and the utmost concern and the most laborious practice to keep the commands. And the commandments are not easy to keep. They call us to disobey our rebellious inborn sin nature. But Yahweh has provided us with commandments and witnesses and laws, which he has commanded us to do, and he wants the very best for us, so he would not command us to obey his exalted ethical standards if it did not open the gates to the very best in us. And if we do right and please him and follow his will and do his work and follow his way, then all will be well with us, and we will lay hold and lay promise that the Israelites would lay hold and lay promise to and lay claim to the land of milk and honey that was promised originally to their ancestor Abraham, the father of their race, and then renewed by Moses. But the problem was that there were already people who occupied this land that was set apart for them, and they had to get rid of them to drive them out. And this takes us to the opening verse of the 7th chapter, which marks the beginning of the lesson itself. When Yahweh your Elohim brings you into the land which you go to possess, he shall clear away many nations before you, the Hittites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you. So this just wasn't one nation, this wasn't one group of people, there were 7 of them. And in the Hebrew numerology, the 7 indicates an element of completeness and totalness. But Yahweh, this was their land, and they could not tolerate the presence, or at the very least, the influence of these Aboriginal inhabitants whose practices and lifestyles were particularly abominable and detestable in the sight of Yahweh. And let's examine each 7-1. The Hittites originally hailed from north-central Turkey and the Anatolia Peninsula. They had an empire at one point which extended as far south as Syria, and their empire collapsed in 1200 BM. So the Deuteronomy was written a little before then. But they had settled in Canaan, even though their empire and their territory reaches only as far as Canaan. The Girgashites were Canaanite inhabitants of mysterious origins. No one knew where they came from. They knew where they currently dwelled. The Amorites were Semitic people who hailed originally from the north-central section of Syria, and several of them had migrated to the land that the Israelites had been promised, and they were to go and occupy and displace these peoples and their religion and the people themselves, ideally. The Perizzites were, again, mysterious origin. In all likelihood, they were not related to the Canaanites, yet they dwelled in the Canaan land. The Hivites were non-Semitic people who existed throughout the Mid-East, and I forgot to mention the Canaanites. These were the grandsons of Noah, Ham. When Noah's nakedness was uncovered in the 10th chapter of Genesis, Ham alone noticed it, and he told his other brothers, who did the right thing and covered his nakedness. And for his sin and for exposing Noah's sin, a curse was pronounced on the grandson of Canaan. They would be the servants of Shem's descendants, but there was more than one. The Hebrews were far from the only Semitic descendants of him, and I think I left off at the Jebusites. That's the 7th and final one. These were the Aboriginal inhabitants of Jerusalem, which eventually became the capital city, religious and temporal, of the land that the Israelites possessed by the time that it became a monarchy under the tutelage of King David. But these 7 nations were greater and mightier than them. They were established. They had walled cities. They had civilized edifice. The Israelites were coming from the desert with pitchforks and just these cattle from Egypt. And when Yahweh your Elohim gives them over to you, you shall smite them and put them under the ban completely. Make no covenant with them and show them no favor. So he's commanding them to kill them, to get rid of them, enter into no arrangement, do not engage in friendship or diplomacy, and do not show them any grace or any favor, no preferential treatment. These are people that Yahweh wants gone from the land that he has reserved for his people. So they had his permission to smite them and put them under the ban. That means, not allow them to worship their detestable and abominable deities and idols and edifices and everything else. And do not intermarry with them, and you do not give daughter to his son, and you do not take his daughter for your son. So the intercultural marriage, it wasn't an interracial marriage, because remember, most of the seven nations that were already there were of Semitic stock, as were the Hebrew people. But he was worried about the contamination of the culture, and more specifically the religion, entering, corrupting, compromising, diluting, and perverting the religious heritage of the sons born through such a union. So they were to marry within their own religion with people who shared the same worship in the same deity, not these scattered, imaginary, evil, wicked, and abominable and detestable deities that Israel was expressly commanded not to bow down to. And so the way that they would do that, the sin of idolatry is closely connected to the sin of adultery, and more than just a play on words. So when you can marry, but you're still engaging in adultery when you marry someone who Yahweh has not designated for you to marry. For he turns your sons away from following me to serve other mighty ones. Then the displeasure of Yahweh shall burn against you and promptly destroy you. So the consequences for disobedience is destruction. They anger a jealous, an omnipotent God who is a consuming fire and who resorts to wrath even on his chosen people, should they elect to disobey his commandments. And all it takes was falling in love with a forbidden woman, a strange woman, a woman who did not belong to the covenant community, with whom they would raise their sons, and that would be the key that unlocked the door to adultery, and this would incur his wrath and his displeasure and his retribution, and it would be prompt. So there's an element of immediacy. This will not become an entrenched tradition, because any Israelite who does intermarry will be immediately extinguished. But this is what you do to them: break down their altars and destroy their pillars, and cut down their Ashtarim, burn their carved image with fires. So he's telling them what not to do, to not intermarry, to not beget children through them. But this is what, more positively, this is what he is to do. They are to destroy their altars. These are the edifices, the places and the locations, the sacred locations, where the altars, the sacrifices, and the images and the idols were erected. And they were to destroy their pillars and cut down Ashtoreth. Ashtoreth poles were wood poles representative of the Canaanite fertility goddess, known by that name, Ashtoreth. She was considered the mother of all the gods, much in the same way that Zeus was considered the father of all the gods in the Greek polytheistic pantheon. In the Canaanite polytheistic system, Ashtoreth was the progenitor of all the gods, and she was a mother, but there was to be no presence. Her influence was strictly forbidden in the covenant community, so they had to burn it with fire. They were not to preserve it, not to keep it intact, not to try and convert it into something to Yahweh. Yahweh told them to get rid of it whole scale, scorched earth, leave nothing behind, spare nothing, destroy it completely, get it out of there. You stay away from that stuff and kill it, destroy it, because that's what I say. For you are a sacred people to Yahweh your Elohim. Yahweh your Elohim has chosen you to be a people for himself, a treasured possession above all the people of the earth. So from this privilege comes obligations and responsibilities. They are chosen for a select purpose, a purpose beyond their ability to conceive or even fathom. They are chosen to represent the maker of humanity from the humanity who had been estranged by them, and he wanted to give them no sanction and quarter to people who did not share their royal priesthood, that they were not sacred or set apart or separate from them to be chosen, and they were a source of treasure and value, a treasured possession above all the people on the face of the earth. So they were special. They were, Yahweh loves all creation, but he especially loved Israel, and he chose them for a special purpose. So they were the apple of his eyes and the center of his affection. Yahweh did not place his love on you, nor choose you, because you were more numerous than any other people, for you are the least of all the people. So Yahweh's wonder works most magnificently when he works through small numbers, such as we witness in the 6th and 7th chapter in the book of Gideon. He forbade the Israelite army, which conquered the Midianite oppressors, from being more than 300 people, just so that the Israelites would not boast in them, their military might, in themselves giving themselves victories. Yahweh made manifest and made himself known through that way. And he does, work through human weakness and human stupidity. He confounds the wisdom of the wise of the world, and the despised and rejected are the ones who are chosen to his path in the New Testament. But because of Yahweh loving you, and because of him keeping the oath which he swore to your father, Yahweh has brought you out with a strong arm and redeemed you from the house of bondage, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So much is foundational to their newfound status as a covenant nation, being rooted in their redemption from literal bondage. And it was all an act of love, and he kept his oath, his word, his promise is as good as himself. He is not a man that he may not lie, Numbers 23:11. And he promised to his fathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all the rest, that they would possess this land would be theirs. And he brought them out of slavery with a strong hand, and he is the source of their redemption and ransom and rescue. And he liberated them from literal bondage, and that is foundational to the covenant and the promises that they will claim when they claim that land. And you shall know that Yahweh, your Elohim, he is Elohim, the trustworthy El, keeping covenants and kindness for 1,000 generations with those who love him and those who guard his commandments. So that when this is all said and done, they have the witness, and they will have the witness sealed and solidified in their memory that that this Yahweh is faithful and trustworthy, intrinsically so. He keeps his end of the commandment, and his kindness extends. We read in the Decalogue in the 5th chapter of Deuteronomy, also in the 20th chapter of Exodus, that he keeps his mercy for those who uphold and honor his commandments unto the 1,000th generation. And Yahweh does not bluff, he does not lie, he does not embellish, he does not exaggerate for effect. He means what he says, he knows what he says, and means what he says and knows what he means. But it is those who love him and those who keep his commandments, and love is the motivational factor for obedience. This is made plain in the New Testament when John 15:14 and where he in one other verse in John's 15th chapter where he says, "If you love me, you will keep my obedience. So our motivation for obedience not be the cringing fear of punishment, but love. We have to genuinely, willfully, and want to do the will, and it's not, fear is secondary and incidental to it. But repaying those who hate him to their face and to destroy him, he does not delay with him who hates them. He repays him to his face. So if you disobey, you rebel, you deviate, you apostatize, you in any way, shape, or form go your own way and do your own thing, reject, forsake, neglect, and dishonor, and disrespect, and disobey the commandments which are given to you for a purpose, your punishment will be swift, sudden, immediate, and irrevocable. And if you hate him, hate is a strong word, but a lot of the world does hate the Father. The Father hates no one, but much of the world hates because the world is under Satan's system, and Satan is a prideful being, and the sin of pride leads you to be hateful and want to destroy everything. So Satan has an exclusively destructive role in society, but that's neither here or there. But you will be repaid, you will be restituted, you will be recompensed, you will be given what is owed to you, you will reap what you have sown. To your face there will be no mistaking for it. And you shall keep the commandments and the laws and the judgments which I commanded you today to do to them. So the obedience has no expiration date. It is to be obeyed presently, now, and in all future generations. So this marks the dawning of the era, and they must do it. They must obey it. They have the written expressions. There's no argument around them. You can circumvent your way out of it. You can excuse yourself from doing it, but you have no legitimate argument to make against the written and revealed and spoken word of the commander, the God who commands us to do what there is literally no way around. And it is coming to them today. Now, the title Deuteronomy indicates a repetition of the law. So it is the capstone of the Torah. It is Moses' final farewell address. And it shall be, because you hear those judgments, and you shall guard and do them, that Yahweh your Elohim shall guard you with the covenant and the kindness which he swore to your father. So if and because you hear and not only hear but keep, so you listen, you learn, you obey, you apply, you don't just observe it physically in the ear. It doesn't go in one ear and out the other. It goes through the ear, saturates your mind and your heart, and you will live, learn, and obey and honor what you read, the justice, and do them. And then the reward, the reciprocal reward, is that Yahweh honors and upholds his end of the covenant. His end is an unbreakable bond. He is an intrinsically faithful and trustworthy being, incapable of lying or anything else. And the kindness which he bestows on those whom he will dispose upon will be more favorably inclined to honor you with the promises that he had made to their ancestors. And of course, the promise is alive and well, even after the age of the Gentiles in 586. In 1948, Israel became a nation of the Jews. 13th and final verse. There's 26 verses in this chapter. We don't have nearly enough time to cover it in its entirety, so we're going to cut it in half. and shall love you and bless you and increase you, and shall bless the fruit of your womb, and the fruit of your land, and the grain and new wine of your oil, and the increase of your cattle, and the offspring of your flock, and the land which he swore your fathers to give you. So there are temporal blessings and benefits for spiritual obedience. This is it is made possible by Yahweh's love and blessing. He will increase you. He will increase your children. He will increase your population. He will increase the abundance and bounty of the harvest that you yield. And so he's going to bless the fruit of your womb. Children born to you are going to have something to look forward to in the promised land. And the fruit of your land, the stuff you grow, the stuff you cultivate, the stuff you labor to make a crop of, grain, new wine, anything else, cattle, offspring. And this will all take place in the land which was promised originally to Abraham. And this promise is coming alive and well, and they are there to witness it. And how dare they take something like that lightly? And eventually they did, but they did have this fantastic promise, and they were about to go in and possess and claim the promised land. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.